Gemma and Milo, Part 15, 16 and 17. The water spun friends and enemies alike. Gemma, Milo, Charles Bucket and the jaguar were caught up in the whirlpool as the water filled the dome. The scroll, knocked loose from Milo's hand, was swimming freely too. Charles Bucket reached out to grasp it, but missed by just a hair. The jaguar, used to meals on the run, tried to bite for it with his teeth. He missed it by a hair so small that it is smaller than the smallest hair on your head after a haircut. Gemma tried to steady herself by grabbing onto the large tube of the telescope with her arm, but she slipped away. She whirled and swirled and began to feel dizzy. Moments later, as she came back around, she grabbed at the telescope with both arms in desperation and got hold. Milo was trying desperately to swim against the current to reach the scroll. Charles Bucket grabbed the jaguar and flung him towards the scroll. The jaguar let out a terrible yelp as he was tossed around by the pool. Milo ducked under the water and made one last attempt to reach the scroll. When he popped back up, Gemma saw him with his sopping face and big yellow eyes. She didn't care about the scroll. She didn't care about Charles Bucket or Willow or rabbits or ships. She didn't even care about the greatest treasure in the world. Milo was her friend. There was no greater treasure than a friend like Milo. He stuck with her through it all, and it was her job to keep him safe. As he spun by her, Gemma caught him by the arm and slowly pulled him towards the telescope. "Forget the scroll, Milo. We need to get out of here." Gemma pushed Milo up the telescope and then hugged it tight. Milo started climbing towards the top, which Gemma knew had a great glass lens. It was still pointed to the hole in the top of the dome, and that's where they needed to get. As they reached the rim, Gemma looked back down. Charles Bucket and the jaguar were thrashing around in the water, desperately looking for the scroll. With their feet on the glass lens, Gemma and Milo lifted themselves up and out of the observatory. By then, Charles Bucket and his enraged jaguar were climbing up behind them. They saw that the lake had flooded the dry circle of land where they once landed, and the balloon was nowhere in sight. Only that small space at the very top of the observatory was above the water. No bigger than a trampoline, it was shrinking at a rapid pace, and soon they would be joined by unfriendliest of guests. Then Gemma saw something that she had not counted on. "Look!" yelled Gemma. The dusty rust basket, almost as if on cue, was sailing on its own towards them, riding the waves of water. It was poorly named. It was cluttered, and dusty, and rusty. But at that moment, Gemma had never seen a more beautiful boat. She tapped her shoulder, and Milo swung up. She bent her knees and readied herself as it approached. 1, 2, 3. Gemma and Milo jumped aboard, knocking over cans and keys, spades, and trinkets. In a flash, she was up and at the steering wheel, turning the boat as far away from the dome as she could. And it was a lucky thing too, because Charles Bucket and his Jaguar were a mere seconds behind them. As the boat pulled away, safely out of reach, Charles Bucket stood up and stared at Gemma. His Jaguar shook his whole body, spewing drops of water like a sprinkler. Gemma heard her grandma's bell jingle once again. The sea wind on her damp clothes made her cold, but it was Charles Bucket's smile that made her shiver. Gemma found a stream that fed the lake and made their escape. It gave way to a narrow but strong river, which soon would open into the sea. The stars were all Gemma needed to navigate the seas, and later that night she would charter across to Harbour Town. She had much more to discuss with her Uncle Horace. The adventure, it seemed, was over. "We made it, Milo," she said, steering the boat like it had always been hers. She wove around rocks and trees that jutted out over the river like arms. Milo smiled and raised a finger to get her attention, but Gemma was busy in thought. "I mean, we didn't get the scroll, but we're safe, and that's all that matters," she said. Milo coughed loudly, trying to grab Gemma's attention again. "Although we still don't know what was on that map, even after all this time," she continued. Milo waved his arms at her, but she kept her gaze on the river, as any good captain would. "And now Charles Bucket has it, and can we talk about him for a second? Can you believe what he..." Milo jumped up and down and squeaked as loudly as he could, finally drawing her confused stare. "What is it, Milo?" she asked. Standing in front of Gemma, Milo raised his tail from behind his back. It was clasping a shiny, slightly wet silver scroll. There was a brief and beautiful pause. "Milo!" Gemma screamed with a smile. "You got the scroll! You are a wonderful, brilliant little lemur." Milo smiled too big for his face and blushed underneath his fur. He handed her the scroll, but with his tail. You might say he tailed it to her, if that word didn't already have another meaning. "Looks like we're finally going to see what it is," Gemma said, not able to contain her excitement, even a little. Gemma tapped her shoulder and Milo hopped up to see, with their faces towards the river, as the dusty rust basket opened into the vast sea. Gemma opened the scroll. Her smile turned to surprise and wonder. "It can't be," she said. "All those years ago." The next part of this story. Young Gemma's tears blurred her eyes. The waterfall became nothing more than sparkling lights cascading down into the stream. Her parents would be leaving her, and she didn't know for how long. "What are you going to look for?" Gemma demanded. "Tell me what it is." Gemma's mum let out a sigh. She kept her eyes on the constellation Pyxis as she spoke. "What if I told you that there are magical creatures, Gemma? Real-life magical creatures," she said. "Like unicorns?" Gemma asked, drying her eyes. Her mum's question had thrown her, and she was going to need more information before returning to her fit of crying. "Yes, unicorns, and sea monsters, and centaurs, and griffins, and mermaids, and so many more," Gemma's mum answered. Gemma's eyes were wide with wonder. These were some of her favourite things to talk about in the world, but really were they brought up by people who were not her. "And what if I told you there's a map that tells you how to find them all?" "What would you say?" asked her mum. Gemma thought long and hard, her tears already drying in the corners of her eyes. "I'd say that's the most greatest treasure in the world." Gemma's mum turned to her daughter and laughed. "I think that's what we'll call it then," she said, crouching down and hugging her daughter. "We will go find the treasure and come back to you. But Gemma?" "Yes," she answered, hugging back with all her might. "You will always be our greatest discovery. There is nothing more precious to us than you." Gemma's mum held her out and looked her in the eyes. "That's why we named you Gemma." Tears found Gemma again, years later, on the deck of the Dusty Rust basket. "I forgot," she said aloud. "I didn't think she—" Could it really be true? Milo's tail curled around her neck as he leaned in closely to the map. It covered all the world and the 8 seas. There were drawings of fantastical creatures and landmarks and dotted paths to sail them there. It was a map to magical creatures. It was a treasure that her family had been searching for since she was a child. "Wonders unseen," whispered Gemma, "and everyone is looking for them." Gemma licked her finger and held it up to check for wind. She cleared off a small table on the deck and laid the map out, holding it down with a metal gear and clay mug. Searching through a box of cloth, Gemma tore off a thin strip of ribbon and made a second braid in her hair. At the hem of the Dusty Rust basket, Captain Gemma turned the ship towards the Cascade Sea. Milo climbed onto the bow of the boat and felt the cool air on his face. And the final part of this story. On Marston Island, in the mild southern waters of the Cascade Sea, Gemma and Milo trekked up a grassy hill. The wind was blowing them forward, pushing them towards the top. A dozen small streams lined in with mossy rocks woven and around the grass at their feet. The blue sky connected to the sea all around them. They had travelled for weeks through harsh waves and fierce storms. They were the kind that only an experienced sea captain could navigate. Lucky for us, Gemma was that and more. She and her first primate, Milo, as he was now officially called, had made it to their first stop no one had ever heard of. but someone had named a lifetime ago. An island that only one map in the world could take you to. There were few alive who knew it by name, and fewer still who knew how to pronounce it. As it happens, dear friend, I must admit that I am not one of them. Gemma held the map out in front of her. She enlisted a trick that she had learned soon after inspecting it. For reasons unknown to her, when Gemma pulled out on a section of the map, it would expand, becoming larger and clearer. New words would appear with finer details. It was beyond the abilities of any map that Gemma had ever seen. It was how she navigated the Strait of Horns way. It was how she found the secret turn in the rocky waters of the Mosaic Sea. It was impossibly magical. But then, most of what had happened since Gemma started her adventure was true. And according to her map, there was something even more magical up ahead. Something worth protecting, with an ancient guard of explorers, shielding with riddles, and hiding away on a secret map. Gemma and Milo came to the top, the crest of the hill. The wind blew past her face and then stopped as she looked down on a green valley. The rolling hills were breathtaking, but they were nothing compared to what she saw next. Down the slope, in a small bright clearing, 12 unicorns were grazing. For the first time in her life, Gemma was speechless. Milo was equally speechless, but much more used to it. As they walked towards the unicorns, they couldn't know what lay ahead. But then again, that's always the way with adventurers. And so, dear friend, now the story has been told for the first time, but maybe not the last. That, as a mustachioed sea merchant once said, is up to you. Thank you for reading this story with me. I hope you enjoyed all 17 parts. If you really liked it, make sure to like, share and comment this story. Also, tell me what was your favorite part in the comment section below. Thank you for watching and goodbye.